welcome to Subject to Interpretation, a podcast which takes us deep into the topics that matter to professional interpreters. I'm your host, Maria Ceballos Wallis. Well, it has certainly been an eventful first quarter of 2023. We're already in April, so much done, so much left to do on our to-do lists, especially with summer around the corner. Some of us are literally running from job to job, and others are rushing to grab a snack between virtual hearings. So much so that we don't always have time to go to the gym or even have a proper lunch. Well, whichever way you live your professional life, whether as a series of sprints, relays, or more like an evenly paced marathon, you're going to have to take time out for self-care. So today on Subject to Interpretation, we have a very special guest who joins us precisely to share her insights and techniques on this very topic. Athena Matilsky, welcome to Subject to Interpretation.
Thank you so much for having me, and good morning.
Well, good morning. So Athena, let's start with this. You are a U.S. federally certified and also state certified court interpreter. You're also an interpreter trainer. You regularly present at conferences, and you have your own YouTube channel. Basically, having said all of that, you are quite a busy lady with what I consider to be a seemingly endless supply of energy and drive. So how do you do it?
Well, thank you. The supply is not endless, although it may look that way. Yeah, it's so interesting because self-care is not, I never really thought about it like, okay, now I'm going to do my self-care. But I think that as I've gotten into this profession, and then as the profession has influenced what I do with the rest of my life, I've definitely implemented a lot of different coping strategies, because if you don't take care of yourself, then you are going to run out of energy. So yes.
So how do you actually define self-care? Do you have a definition for it?
I do. I was thinking about this yesterday, and what I wrote down on my little cheat sheet here is that self-care is when we nurture ourselves. It's nurturing ourselves emotionally, physically, intellectually, mentally, spiritually. And necessarily part of that is setting boundaries, because you're not going to be able to have the time to take care of yourself unless you say no to certain things. It's saying yes to some things, saying no to other things. And the thing that I keep thinking about is when, imagine we've all either had babies or we know people have had babies, and at the very beginning, they can't do anything for themselves. They can't feed themselves. They can't do anything. They're completely helpless, right? And so as a parent, you have to spend an incredible amount of energy taking care of this person. And then as the person begins to grow really into a person, then they take on that burden of taking care of themselves and feeding themselves and housing themselves and making sure that spiritually, emotionally, mentally, they're in a good place. And so as we enter adulthood, now it's our responsibility. Now we have to take care of ourselves. And it's not necessarily something that we take seriously enough. And a lot of us spread ourselves too thin, and we put too much on our plate, and we should be saying no to about 3/4 of the things that we're doing. So one of the things that I think has allowed me to say yes to so many things has been saying no to other things. I can't make room for things unless there's breathing space.
So Athena, I was going to ask you when it would be best to, engage in self-care, but it seems to me like it's more of a 24/7 kind of enterprise.
Yes, definitely. And it's the sort of thing where we don't want to have self-care be another overwhelming thing on our to-do list. So one thing that I've learned in the last few years actually is something really simple that you can incorporate into your day-to-day is just having buffer time, even 5 minutes. Right? So instead of being like, okay, I finished this thing and now I'm due with the next thing and there's no breathing space, just make 5 minutes. Or even, so I give private lessons, or I used to. I haven't been giving as many anymore, but I was doing private coaching. And one thing I did at the beginning was I had 5 minutes between students. And then I realized, I was like, I always feel this elevated sense of anxiety, because if the last student goes a couple minutes over, and maybe there's even a tech issue and it's not their fault, and I want to give them that extra couple of minutes, then I'm either late or rushing. And so something really simple that I did was I said, okay, there's going to be 15 minutes in between each student. And then if we go over 5 minutes, I still have 10 minutes to go use the bathroom, have a drink of water. And it's a very easy, simple thing that I can do in structuring my life that it's not saying, okay, I'm taking an hour and a half out of my day every day to go to the gym, but I'm making sure that I have space in between each thing that I do. And that's been really helpful, the concept of buffer time.
I think that's really, really smart, especially for somebody like me. I'm, ADHD running, 24/7, all the time until basically I just give out. And lately I've had to learn to force myself to, focus on one thing at a time because, even though one might think that multitasking is, the way that it should be, sometimes in the end, it costs you more to be, running, three different programs at the same time instead of maybe just, one at a time and giving your full attention to it.
Absolutely. In the first year of my master's program, we interpreted a speech on monotasking. And I think it changed my life. The concept, it was one of my professors recorded the speech and then we had to interpret it. But the speech will always stick with me because it was talking about how really we can't multitask. We can do one thing and then another thing very rapidly. And so we practiced that with simultaneous interpreting, for example. But the whole thought behind this speech was actually it's better if we can focus on our attention fully on one thing at a time. And that really helped me when I approach the different projects in my life, being like, okay, now I'm making space for this thing. And then I have my little buffer time, and then I'm making space for the next thing.
Well, now that you bring it up, not too long ago, you uprooted your life in the US and moved to Toronto, Canada to complete your master's in conference interpreting, Spanish, English, French. I believe it's at Glendon College at York University. So let's start with that. Would it be safe that at that point you were pretty much doing some form of interpreting or immersed in interpreting in one way or another 24/7? Would you, what did you do? Were you still working and training interpreters at this time? Or were you able to find a work life balance or study balance?
Yes, it was very challenging. Those 2 years of my life were maybe some of the most intense to date, and I've had a lot of intense moments. So yes, I was immersed in it 24/7. Some days we were on campus 12 hours. We weren't always that way, but often. So, and you needed to be. There was so much you had to do, and every single day you spent time interpreting and then having people critique your interpreting all day long. And so it was an intellectual labor, but it was also an emotional labor because you're working so hard and then you're having your work picked apart every single day. And so to be able to keep spirits up is important because you're being told every single day what you could do better and what you're not doing right now. So I was at the beginning working. I was a little bit. I was like, I'm going to keep my private coaching students. I'm not going to, at that time, I was mostly doing my training, which I'm still doing now. I love teaching interpreting. And so I had a bunch of private coaching students, or maybe not even that many, maybe it was like 5, but it was too many. And by the time September came to an end, I don't know how long I lasted giving those private coaching sessions, but I got to a point where I had to message my students and say, I'm so sorry. But I just, again, the saying no, the setting boundaries as part of the self-care. I was like, I really want to be there for you right now, but I just can't. And they were very understanding because they knew that I was doing this for my professional development. And that was a good thing too. But yeah, it was something that I didn't want to say goodbye to, but I had to because my brain, it felt like it was spritzing. Like we'd get to the end of the night and like it's short circuiting and I can't form sentences and it was not good.
So I was going to ask you earlier, which do you think is more important, physical, mental, or emotional self-care? Is there a distinction between them?
It's all really important. And I've had students before who are like, okay, I'm gonna, because you have to find time to study. And so I had one student who was finding time to study, and that meant that he wasn't sleeping more than 5 hours a night. And I was like, it's not sustainable. It's not possible. If you're not eating, sleeping, and getting some form of exercise, your brain isn't going to be where it needs to be in order to learn the techniques that you have to learn and study the way that you should.
So what about when you were in the middle of, this practically 24/7 training, 12 hours on campus, and just really a lot of attention focused on your performance? how did you, what kind of techniques did you use to help you, balance, or, when you got home, what did you do so that maybe you could, tune out or maybe regroup?
So three things were really important for me. One was I made sure that I got outside at some point during the day, no matter what. So even when it was freezing cold outside, I would put on my jacket, put on my hat and mittens, and I would walk around the campus. And being outside and breathing the fresh air really helped. So sometimes that meant during lunch, I would take a sandwich outside and I would eat it outside in the freezing cold because Toronto is cold. So going outside, that was really helpful. I also bicycled to and from the campus, so that allowed me to get some exercise in. It was also the quickest mode of transportation. So it killed two birds with one stone, which I find I like efficiency. That just something that I think is good. So okay, that was one thing, was making sure I got outside, I got myself moving. The other thing was I well, two other things. One was I made sure that I had one day a week that was mine. And that was, it felt like I was cheating or something by taking that space for myself. But I also knew that, the brain is a muscle like anything else. And you know how if you're working your biceps one day, you're supposed to work a different muscle the next day. You're not supposed to do the same muscle over and over. And our brain is the same. Our brain needs time to absorb what we've learned and to be able to integrate it. And you can't just push yourself all day every day. There has to be downtime, there has to be rest. So Saturday was my day of rest, and I've been pretty religious about Saturday continuing to be my day of rest, actually. And that was nice. Saturday was the day that I could do whatever I wanted, and it gave me something to look forward to the rest of the week. So when I was doing nothing else but interpreting all week long, it helped me to stay sane by knowing I'd have Saturday.
Well, it sounds to me like it was a bit of a trial by fire that you went through. And have you been able to share these techniques and these, I guess, these new learnings with your students?
Absolutely. Yeah. The third thing that I did, I mean, I did probably more than that, but one other thing that I think is worth mentioning is that I've had a pretty much daily meditation practice for a long time, for many years. And that kept going during the master's program. And there's a quote out there, I don't know who wrote it, but somebody said, if meditate each day for a half hour. If you don't have enough time, meditate for an hour. And I was not always, I sometimes was a half hour, an hour. Sometimes it was just 2 minutes. It was like, okay, I'm going to make this space where I breathe and I focus on calming my nervous system for 2 minutes. And that's better. That's better than saying, oh, it has to be a half hour and then not doing it because I get overwhelmed. So what I've shared with my students has been as much of that as possible, the taking care of yourself, especially before an exam. One thing that I'll tell my students is, the preparation for an interpreting exam has to be done months in advance. You can't start prepping for an interpreting exam the week before. And I do have some students who contact me frantically because their test is next week and they want to know how to, and I'm like, no, because these things take time. You have to develop habits, you have to make things automatic, and that does not happen overnight. So what I tell my students is, hopefully you have been doing the studying that you need to do months and weeks in advance. At least 2 days before the exam, your job is to take care of yourself. Make sure that you get yourself in the right mindset. Don't be studying hard and complicated material where you're suddenly going to get overwhelmed because you realize that you don't have the vocabulary from this subsection of whatever it is you could have learned before. You're just going to get overwhelmed because there's always going to be more vocabulary you could have studied. There's always going to be more technique that you could have mastered. So 2 days before the exam, enough's enough. It's your job to put yourself in the right mindset, to get exercise, to get sleep, to do what you need to do to take care of yourself physically and mentally and spiritually and all the rest, so that you'll be good in a good headspace for the exam.
Yeah, I completely understand that, especially the last couple months in my own study practice. That made a huge difference. As a matter of fact, our study group began working towards the federal exam prior to the pandemic, and the exam was not offered. So what our study group actually ended up doing was we kept on studying together through the pandemic. And by the time the next offering came around, then we were, we had actually just been doing it religiously. As a matter of fact, now we're, a really great support group for each other, which is, I think, another component of self-care that that is important to mention. Find people who are like-minded, find people who will also challenge you, but who will share. You'll be able to feel comfortable sharing, how you feel, what's going on with you, and, whose opinion you value, right?
Absolutely. Having support is crucial, and having support from the right people, because sometimes you might seek support from somebody who isn't supportive and that can be not so fruitful. But if you have somebody who can really be there for you in those difficult moments and just, remind you of your strengths and remind you how hard you're working, it can be really nice. And by the way, congratulations, because I know that your studying paid off and you're now federally certified.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm really quite proud, more than anything, of the discipline and the amount of work that went into it, and the relationships that were built along the way, because it just, it was a life-changing journey when I started looking at it as a learning opportunity and as a relationship building opportunity, rather than just, okay, here's a test, I need to figure out how to beat this test. And the story. So thank you. I really appreciate that. Now you have, I think you have something that you share with your students that you wanted to share with us today. I think we'll let you share your screen if you can.
Yeah, sure. So this is a breathing exercise that actually Virginia Valencia introduced me to, and it's on YouTube. It's free, so anybody can access it. I'm sure you could probably put a link in the show notes if you wanted to. But even if you just type in 1 minute breathing exercise into YouTube, you'll get this one if you like it, or you'll get any number of other exercises. And it's something that you can do before you practice interpreting, before you go into a difficult assignment, and before exams. Because what it's doing when we conscientiously breathe like this is we're making sure we send oxygen to our brains. We're slowing down our breath, and that tells our nervous system that we're calm, even if we don't feel calm. So it tricks our nervous system into thinking we're calm. And instead of having that adrenaline, like, we're all built up and there might be a tiger chasing us right now, because that's evolutionarily how our nervous system is formed, where there's something scary, get ready to run. But actually, we don't want to be ready to run. We want to have our minds clear so that we can do the best job we can, even when we're in a nerve-wracking situation. So this one, I really like it. It's a puffer fish, and what you'll see is he goes up, and as he goes up, you breathe in, and as he goes down, you breathe out. So I'll share my screen now. Here he is, and we'll breathe with him.
He's adorable.
Isn't he? All right, let's go. And out. And if you can, breathing through your nose. And there you have it.
Well, I feel so much better now.
Yay.
Well, I mean, so many things came to my mind during that time. The first one, which is probably not what you intended, was, okay, I'm going to be here for a minute. This is 1 out of 3 minutes that I would, or 1 out of 2.5 minutes or 3 minutes that I would have to read the sight translation portion of an exam, so that I can then render it into the other language. So that's, believe it or not, one of the things
that went into my mind. The other one was, well, you should just really be enjoying this puffer fish. He's so cute. Just, enjoy it. And don't think about what you're going to say after the puffer fish is over. Just, just enjoy the puffer fish. So, I mean, does that happen to you, or you're doing one thing and you're meant to be doing one thing, but then, your mind is racing everywhere and it's dividing your attention?
So I think that the most misunderstood thing about meditation and what we just did, it's in the vein of meditation, right? It's focusing in our breath and it's trying to kind of clear our mind. So that's what people know about meditation, is you're supposed to clear your mind. So people tend to think that you'll close your eyes and you'll find this beautiful space of relaxation, and then they get mad at themselves when they can't find it, because actually what happens is their thoughts are amplified and all of a sudden you can see all of the different things. And so the practice of meditation, which incorporates breathing, is like looking at the chaos of your mind. It's looking at everything, all of the ways in which you are analyzing the past and anticipating the future, and learning how to not have that run your life. Because what happens now is we have a thought, and then the thought takes us in a particular direction, and then another thought comes in, and oh my gosh, now it's taking us in another direction. Then 5 more thoughts come in, and then we start to feel like we're going crazy. And so the practice of meditation is a practice. You're practicing mind control. You're practicing looking at the chaos of your brain and reminding yourself that doesn't need to run your life. That, okay, yes, I'm having a thought about site translation. That's an interesting thought. I'll explore later. Okay, yes, I'm thinking about what question I'm going to ask Athena next. That's cool. Maybe I'll write it down. And I do even that sometimes when I'm meditating, especially at the beginning, if there was something that it felt like this is the most important thought, and if I don't forget this thought, then I'm gonna, right? And you realize eventually that actually it's okay if you forget those thoughts, and probably if they're important, they'll come back to you. But you start to detach yourself from your thoughts so that you realize that there's actually a stronger, calmer you that's behind all of the crazy thoughts. And then you can make those thoughts work to your advantage, because they're great. I mean, it's important for us to be creative and curious and thinking about the past and thinking about the future, but it's just that we need to be able to detach ourselves enough to then find the presence of mind to do the thing that we do want to focus on. So maybe we do want to focus on actually interpreting in this moment, and that's the only thing we want to focus on. We don't want to be thinking about our grocery list. We don't want to be thinking of, oh, I had a similar experience to this, let me now ponder what I could have done differently in that experience. So the practice of returning to your breath and noticing your thoughts without allowing them to run your life, that's what meditation's about, and that's what the breathing exercises also help us to do.
So, bringing that into the day-to-day, there is so much pressure to achieve in interpreting, in so many areas. I mean, sometimes it has to do with you're at a very long deposition. Sometimes the topic is difficult. Sometimes the situation that surrounds you, the emotionally charged situation, affects the environment that you're in. Sometimes it's just even the environment itself that is, difficult to navigate, noise-wise or space-wise. So I did an informal survey with some of my interpreter friends, and I sent them this. I sent them this scenario. I said, in advance that it's going to be one of those long or difficult days of interpreting. How do you manage your mental and or physical self-care before, during, and after? Now, these are some of the responses I got. And like I said, this was completely informal. This is, over chat and everything. So one friend responded, cough drops, lots of water, listen to music, if possible, on a break, and stretching is a must. Another one said a good cup of coffee in the morning. Another one said, take it easy, meditation, breathing in, only focus on the task I'm doing at the moment and roll with the flow. So working in environments that are less than ideal, in circumstances that are less than ideal, is pretty common for interpreters. What do you say about, what do you say to these interpreters who are managing their self-care in this way, and what could you add that might make them even more efficient, let's say?
I think that all of those suggestions are really good. I know I had an assignment last fall that was incredibly grueling. It was an all-day board meeting And it was there was a lot of pressure, and it wasn't the right circumstance. And we all get into that, right? Where we're like, okay, this wasn't the best situation. And I show up and it's not really a booth. Like they told us there would be a booth, but it's not a booth. It's like a piece of cardboard. And it was uncomfortable. That was actually the worst part about it. I think like I don't have the best back in the world. And so I was sitting there all day, and I suffered afterward. It took me a little while to recover. But so, it's not an exact science. Part of it is speaking up for what we need. And I know now moving forward, when I work with this agency, that I'm going to have to ask them a few questions when they tell me things like they have a booth. Because a lot of times, they're cutting corners to save money. And that means, a lot of times in court interpreting, it means that somebody gets called to an assignment where it's inappropriate for them to work alone, but you're there alone. And now what are you going to do? Your freelance salary depends on it. So part of it is actually look into the conditions and speak up for what you need. And the more that we all do this, the more we elevate standards for the industry as a whole, and the more it becomes commonplace. And then you don't have people saying, oh, but Joe Schmo didn't ask for this last week, and he was okay with getting underpaid and overworked. So definitely noticing when you're damaging your own health by bad conditions, but also where your interpreting isn't as good as it should be because of the conditions. So definitely speaking up. That's important. And also, when I knew that this assignment was approaching, I made space around it. So similar to that whole buffer space that I was telling you about, I knew that it was going to be challenging. It was going to take a lot out of me. And so I left time to prepare beforehand, and I had time to recover afterward. And I made sure that I got enough sleep the night before, which is always scary because when you have something that's coming up that you're really nervous about, then of course your brain doesn't want to go to sleep. But I tried, and I did. I was able to sleep before it. And then when I woke up, I did a quick meditation, and I made sure I had breakfast. So it's those things of making sure that you're taking care of yourself physically and mentally. And then also knowing what you're scared of, what could go wrong, and having mechanisms already in place. Like, okay, if they're speaking too fast, then I will speak up and I will ask for what I need. Or if I make a mistake, then I will speak up and I will correct the mistake. But kind of looking your fears in the face, knowing what could go wrong, and having a plan for what you'll do if it goes wrong, instead of sitting there hoping that it all goes perfectly and freaking out because it might not.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good point. And I might be dating myself, but this book is from before my time, actually. But I think Dale Carnegie wrote in How to Stop Worrying and Start Living that one of the techniques that I actually use from that book is that if there's a big problem, there's something that is, or not necessarily a big problem, it's something that is occupying your mind, you designate a period of time to go through the ins and outs of it, the pluses, the negatives, what could happen if this happens, what would you do what would you do if not, what can you control, what can you not control. And you know that if you spent an hour doing that and you really feel like you have to revisit that issue, then next time you'll spend 30 minutes revisiting the issue, because you're going to come to the same conclusions that you came in at the first time for the first 30 minutes. So towards the end of it, you allow yourself 5 minutes or 1 minute or 30 seconds, a fleeting thought, to think about all this stuff. And you go, oh, hey, I've already reviewed all of that. There's no reason for me to waste my mental energy to in reviewing all of this stuff, which I have already done. I've already done what I needed to do, which is kind of the mindset I went into the exam this time around. Excuse me. And so that's has been a really, really good technique for me, where you limit the amount of time that you ruminate over something, and then when you come back, you can, if it gets skewed in your mind, you address it and then you move on.
Absolutely, absolutely, and part of it too. I don't know if I'm going to get this quote right. There's a quote: "Anxiety does not steal or does not fix tomorrow's problem, but it." Oh no. Okay. I'm going to look for the quote and then I'll get it back to you. But it's about basically anxiety. I think a lot of anxiety comes from us. We're trying to control the future. We're nervous about something and we want the outcome to go our way. And so then we sit there going over it from 1,000 different angles, but often some of those things are out of our control. And so part of anxiety management is looking your fears in the face, understanding what you can do to control and doing that thing, having a plan, implementing the plan, and then also accepting the fact that what is beyond your control is beyond your control. And it might not go the way that you want it. And when you can truly accept that, which is an art, it is not easy, but when you can accept that, then your anxiety starts to dissipate, because it's, you've done what you can do and it will be what it is. And I did something similar. I like your description of Carnegie, and that whole method. I didn't know that it was a method, but I know that when I was facing my exit exams, which I've taken a lot of interpreting exams in my life, but the exit exams from that master's program were the scariest, hardest exams I've ever had. It was a week-long thing where I had 3 languages, so I had 6 exams, because it was into one language, out of one language, into one, So you would get the material the day, not even the materials, you get a sentence on the topic the day before. And then you could spend the whole day prepping that topic, hoping that whatever you were preparing was something in the realm of what you were going to get. And then you had 2 exams the next day, consecutive and simultaneous, morning and afternoon. And then it would repeat for the next day, and then the day after that. And the thing is, if you don't pass these tests, you don't graduate. So I've now spent 2 years of my life, thousands of dollars. I've also broadcasted to the entire universe that I'm taking this master's program because I'm me. And so I had to blog about it. And so I'm like, not only am I going to let down myself, but I'll let down my family, my friends, and strangers I don't even know. And so I sat down and I meditated, and I basically was like, okay, Athena, what are you scared of? And I was like, I'm scared I'll fail. I'm scared I'll look like a fool. I'm scared I'll disappoint my professors. I'm scared that people will think I'm dumb, like all of the things that you can be scared of. And then I was like, okay, that might happen. That I can't control, I've done what I can do. I will do the best that I can do, and it might not be good enough. And so, okay, what'll happen if it's not good enough? Well, there's an opportunity I could retake the exam later on. How will I feel? I will feel sad and depressed. Okay, what am I going to do? I'm going to eat ice cream in bed for a week. Like that was my backup plan. And I had my backup plan. It was ready to go if I failed. And luckily I passed 5 out of the 6 exams. So that was enough to graduate. It's crazy. If I had failed one more exam in one of the other languages, I wouldn't have passed. So when it was very overwhelming. And then I had to take the exams, and I had to wait 2 months. And then you knew the day you were getting the results, but you didn't know what time. And so all of us were refreshing our emails every 5 seconds. It was very, very nerve-wracking, but it really helped to do the sit down thing where I looked at my fears in the face and I said, okay, my fears might come true, and that will really be annoying, and I will be really, really sad, but it's a thing that might happen. And so instead of sitting here being like, oh my gosh, what if that happens? It's like, okay, it might happen. That's a possibility.
So since you since you didn't pass one of the exams, did you have at least 1 or 2 days of ice cream?
I should have. It was very interesting. It was really hard the day that the results came in, because, even though I did pass, of course, I felt bad about the one exam that I had failed. That was very devastating for me because I like to be perfect. So, that was really upsetting. And then also, not all of my classmates passed. And this was a thing where we had been working together all of this time. And so it was like, I wanted to celebrate for myself, but I also felt really sad that some of my classmates hadn't moved forward. And yeah, I had I think it took me a few weeks to just cry, eat some ice cream, but just like integrate the results and also be like, you know what, I worked really hard for this, and I do deserve the results that came in my way, and then I can help my classmates. And I did, so that now a few more of them have been able to graduate as well.
Well, another component of self-care is being generous with yourself and others, sharing your resources. I think that, sometimes when we can help somebody, we can share the information that we have. It also helps us. It cements it in our minds, and it also gives us, those good endorphins for, those good feelings of, hey, all of this was worth it, and I can also help someone or make them feel better about, this, that, or the other.
I actually wanted to make sure that I mentioned this about self-care, because a lot of people feel like it's this frivolous thing. And And I will mention that it is a privilege to be able to take care of ourselves properly. There are people in the United States, in Canada, and other parts of the world who actually can't afford to. They don't have the time or the money to be able to feed themselves and house themselves properly, much less than take time out of their day from the 3 different jobs that they have for a roof over their heads to be able to implement some of the things that we're talking about. But I will also say that there's a lot of us who can afford to engage in self-care. We can afford to take the time that we need, but we don't. We spread ourselves too thin. We take on too many projects, and then we're not able to really be of service to others. And so that's actually what I want to emphasize here, is that self-care is not a selfish act. Because when are you more likely to snap at somebody? When are you more likely to make a mistake? When are you more likely to flake on an engagement that you have? It's when you're spread too thin. It's when you're overcommitted. It's when you're more likely to get sick because you're not taking care of yourself. And so actually, if you take care of yourself and you're mentally, physically, spiritually in a place where you need to be, you'll find yourself with an abundance of energy and ability to help others.
Athena, I completely agree with you. I think that self-care is definitely not selfish. In order to take care of those around you and be able to fulfill the responsibilities that you have, you really do have to be able to function properly. Now, as an interpreter trainer, I wonder, we've talked about all of these things that we do in the moment of performance, and how maybe you might talk yourself off a cliff, or if you're performing and something happens that distracts you. But let's talk about the little things that we can do on a daily basis through our interpreter training, so that we can then automate them and put them into action in our performance, in our day-to-day. So for example, if we were to talk about the consecutive mode of interpretation, there's a lot of moving parts in that don't just come together on the day of. Can we talk a little bit about some of the things, some of the techniques you might apply that could be considered self-care when you're in the process of training in that mode?
Absolutely. And you're right, there's a lot of moving parts with consecutive. And one of the things that I have to convince students, I just, I spend a lot of my time teaching is not so much showing them what to do as convincing them that actually this is what they should do. And one of the things is repetition. And even just of one utterance. When you are working on your consecutive skills, you need to do so many things at once. You have to listen like your life depends on it. You have to be able to maximize your skills of visualization and analysis to understand where the speaker is coming from. Just those 2 things alone can be practiced on their own, and you have to convince people that, because they're like, oh, well, that's not what you do in real life. You don't have a chance to listen and then have a repeat and listen. And I'm like, yes, that's why you do it now when you're practicing, because you teach your brain what it's like to listen and listen and listen some more. And so one of the things that comes up a lot, and I think that this kind of overlaps with our topic of self-care, is when you're working on long utterances. Let's say you have a witness statement and it can be 50 or 60 words long, right? And on a state exam, it's about 50 words is the longest utterance you'll have. On the federal exam, somewhere between 50 and 60 words is the longest utterance you'll have. And in real life, it can go on longer than that. So what ends up happening is people they hear a sentence, they're either taking notes or they're not taking notes, but they're like, okay, good, I got this sentence. And then there's another sentence. They're like, okay, all right, I can get this sentence. And then the speaker keeps talking, and maybe there's a 3rd sentence and a 4th sentence. And then instead of listening, you go into panic mode. And I don't know if this has ever happened to you, but any interpreter I've ever talked to says, yes, this has happened to me. And I know it certainly happened to me. So your panic mode then is, I'm not going to get this. And all of a sudden you have all of these thoughts in your head that are distracting you from listening and from visualizing. And so then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy where no, you are not going to capture that information because you psyched yourself out. And so one of the things that I encourage my students to do is to just work on listening and realize how different it is to listen with stress and listen without stress. If you know you're going to interpret something later, you automatically have a harder time listening than if you just listen for listening's sake. And so then you can actually practice listening and know what it feels like when you're listening without stress, and then try to bottle that up and carry it over. And part of that means repeating that utterance again and again. And people are like, oh, well, I'm becoming familiar with the utterance. Fine, but are you getting it perfect yet? No. Okay, well, keep going and keep teaching your brain what it's like to feel success and to actually be able to absorb a lot of information and to be able to hear the little things that you didn't hear before. And now you're laying it on with notes. So let's look at your notes. How were your notes? Were they efficient? Could they have been better? Let's do the same utterance again. And through that process, you teach your brain to focus on the listening, to maximize your visualization, to be efficient with the note taking, to not distract yourself with your notes so that you continue to listen. And suddenly you're not getting panicked because you have too much else to concentrate on. So I think that that's a pretty good overlap there with consecutive and with self-care. And it's something that I do with almost all of my students, because we all need that. We need to be able to identify when we're going down panic road and then reel ourselves in and remind ourselves to listen. Part of that too is knowing you'll make mistakes. And it's better to make those mistakes at home when you're practicing than in real life. It's also important to recognize we'll probably make mistakes in real life. So let's have the awareness to know when we've made them and be able to correct them. But if you give yourself some leeway, if you say, I'm not expecting myself to be perfect, but I'm going to do the best I can, then suddenly you have this world open up to you and you start to make fewer mistakes. And that's something that I've tried to carry into my life as well. Like all these lessons that we learn in stress management and interpreting, they apply in real life, because in real life, we will also make mistakes. In real life, we're not going to be perfect. In real life, we shouldn't set so many expectations on us, and practice makes perfect.
Absolutely. They say that perfect is an enemy of the good,
Yes.
which is actually one of the phrases that I use to talk myself off a cliff at the points where all of a sudden I think, I'm overthinking a process, or I'm overthinking something that I'm hearing, instead of just really staying in the moment and really listening to what I'm hearing. Now, you mentioned notes so briefly, obviously, since we were talking about the consecutive mode. And of course, some people may take some, notes during the simultaneous, or they doodle, or they do something else. But with the note taking and the consecutive, it seems to me that another good way of practicing self-care, from a performance perspective, is to know what your process is, to know what you want your process to be, and to practice it. So if if that includes note taking, then to really automate your note-taking skills, whether it's symbols or abbreviations, but to really be ready. And the only way to be ready with that it'll come out automatically, is to spend a lot of time doing it, right?
Yes, unfortunately, there's no pill that we can take, and it is the hard work, or that's all it is. And so, yes, absolutely, you need to make things automatic. And what people don't understand about notes is that often your interpreting skills will go down before they go up. If you're struggling with your notes, if you have to improve your notes, then you are going to be dedicating a lot of your brain space on notes, and that's going to steal the brain energy that you have for listening, because we have a finite amount of brain, whatever brain, we'll call it brain energy, and we divide it when we're interpreting. So we're making all these little micro decisions, that steals from our brain. We're taking notes, that steals from our brain. We're trying to make our notes better, that steals a lot from our brain. And so what happens is people are working on their notes, it robs them of their listening, and so then they give inaccurate interpretations, and then they say, oh, well, I shouldn't take notes because it makes my interpreting worse, when actually what you need to do is expect that it'll make your interpreting worse. So don't go out and try a new note-taking technique on the job, don't do that. But at home, where you can make mistakes, and because that's where we learn, the art is in the mistakes, and so we have to be in a space where it's all right for that to happen, where we can push our comfort zone. So it's likely we'll make the mistakes, and then automate, exactly like you said, because once you have symbols that just come to you, once you have abbreviations that just come to you, once you have a structure to your notes, we talk about subject, verb, object, and going diagonally, or indentation, verticality. That's, I think, the trickiest piece of note taking that a lot of people don't understand fully. It takes time to get it. And so you need to make that automatic. But once you do, it's beautiful. My note-taking system is not perfect. Nobody's is, but I've spent many years working on it. And now I'm at the point, when we were in our program, I was interpreting speeches up to 8-10 minutes long, not necessarily to the level of detail that we require in court interpreting, but I could do it. I could look at my notes, and while I'm listening, so much of what's happening is really you're making a mental note, and what you place on the paper is just there to jog your memory. So eventually you get to this point where the note taking is automated. You're listening really, really hard. That creates a memory in your brain, and then you look at your notes and it reminds you of that memory. But what's happening is in your brain, it's not in your notes, and that's something that people don't understand.
Yeah, I agree with that. It takes a lot of repetition. It takes a lot of intentional work, intentional concentration to place those things on that paper, such that in the future, an inverted V might always be, your symbol for a house, for example. Which leads me to another aspect of self-care before we close, which is your personal environment, whether it's your car or your home office, where you work and where you study. Do you have any suggestions, any tips that, things that have that you have found out over the years that really work for you, that you think might transfer over to other people when they're creating that environment?
Sure. When I moved into my own place last year, the only piece of furniture that I actually owned was a desk. And my whole life, a desk has been the most important thing for me. Like, I don't need a table, I don't need a couch, I need a desk. And creating a space, even if it's just like, in the worst case scenario, let's say you share your space with somebody else and you don't get to design it as this beautiful thing that's just for you. That's lovely if you can, but maybe you can't. Having a basket with all of the things that you need, that has the notebook that you need, the CDs that you'll be using, the CD player or whatever it is, or maybe you have a USB, but having all of your study materials in one spot that you can just then start working. So you don't have to spend 20 minutes looking to find the things that you need before you go. So specifically for studying, I have all of my study materials in one spot, and then I have motivating signs on my wall, quotes, reminders of why I'm doing this. So if you're trying to study for a certification you might not even get for a year or two, it takes a long time, and you have to be able to sustain yourself while you're suffering disappointments, while your friends are going out to parties that you'd rather be joining them for. You need to keep with you need to stay present with why you're doing this. And so I tell my students, put it on their wall, write down why you're doing it, and make it the deep why, not just like I want to pass the exam, but why do you want to pass the exam? So I can get certified. Why do you want to get certified? So that I can make money. Why do you want to make money? And then underneath all that usually is freedom, more time with my family, connection, right? That's the deep why. And so to stay really present with that deep why, it'll carry you through the challenging moments.
So they say that when you fail to plan, you plan to fail, right?
Yes. Another one is a goal without a plan is just a dream.
So we could use any of those, but the bottom line really is that we need to search deep into ourselves and find the reasons why we're doing what we're doing, and try to find the best way of supporting ourselves, and create an environment around us that supports us as well, right?
Absolutely. Yes. And by the way, I looked up the quote from earlier that I wanted to say, and it is, worry does not rob tomorrow of its sorrow. It steals the strength from today.
And on those words, we will leave. We thank you, Athena. Thank you so much for sharing those words with us and sharing all of your insights into self-care. It is clear to me, based on your accomplishments and also on what I hear when you teach, what I hear when you speak, that you definitely put a lot of stock into self-care, and that it has really, it has benefited you in all of your accomplishments. So congratulations to you on that, and thank you for sharing it with us.
Thank you. And thank you so much for having me.
So to everybody else, thank you very much for joining us here on Subject to Interpretation. Don't forget that this year we're celebrating the 25th anniversary of the De La Mora Institute of Interpretation with the Founders Series, a special series celebrating the accomplishment of those individuals who have shaped this industry and are sculpting its future. Don't forget to check out our other episodes wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, never stop learning.